tēnā koutou i tai mai i te timatatanga o te rānei. Nā reira nā koutou i para te arawhata ki te rongawa, nā koutou i mihi atu ki rātou i te hunga kua haere. Ngā mihi kia koutou, tēnā koutou. Tēnā aroha mai ki tēnei i tai tō muri mai. It's called bad time management. And as you heard the introduction, I do a lot of sitting on chairs. Yeah, who said there's no H in that word? So I'm to talk about trees, C's and B's apparently. So I thought I would start with a couple of things. Firstly, in terms of each of those and the way at least my nanny and others taught me. And I will get back to trade and the impact that this might have. Firstly, there's a rule, management rule here in Ngāti Porou, and it's called the 4x2 rule. And it's not what you're thinking, Martin. It's not taking a 4x2 to use it to manage people. It's called 4x2. It's for Ngāti Porou, by Ngāti Porou, to Ngāti Porou. And we can go into a little bit of that, but generally it speaks for itself, especially when I'm talking to potential partners. And also along with that is part of that also, but part of that is also one of our drivers, at least one that we're trying to put into our businesses and community organisations here, is mō ngā uri whakatipu. So everything is done with the view that this is for future generations, plural, and that, as you can imagine, has, and some of you are experiencing, does have, and you heard about this morning, it does have quite a profound impact on because it's why you're doing things, on what you're doing them, how you're doing them, and also to an extent when you're doing. But certainly it's about the what and the how, very much driven by that intergenerational, future-looking perspective. And lastly, which is a bit of a warning for anybody who thinks that they can come back and tell the home folk they know how to do things, kaua e ngau ki te whenua. So whatever happens, we must not put our taonga at risk, because the whole point of all this is to make sure that they will be there and being enjoyed in future generations. That is, as my English forebears would have said, that is with full cultural hereditament. In other words, e oro tunu ai ngā tikanga. They borrowed that term and changed it into hereditament back in the 13th century in the UK. So how does that? So coming back to, I'll start with forestry. Coming back to forestry. In our case, forestry here in Ngāti Porou. Why forestry? Because from the 1930s, we became farmers. Because that's what the best available information at the time said, is you've got all this land, you own great tracts of it, you were fortunate enough to have fought the Pākehās, you were fortunate enough to fought all your neighbours off, and you own all this land, so you should be able to develop it. And they did. And they were very efficient. They cut down a lot of trees off the land. Some of that land which they deforested and went into agriculture is actually best used for some form of forest cover because of its general characteristics and sometimes specific characteristics. So why forestry? Because for a lot of our lands here in this rohe, that's the best use. And then you go to making sure that it is compatible and it is environmentally sustainable. So it's not just a matter of slamming trees in the ground and then letting them grow and cutting them down and walking away. The purpose is hold the land, hold the people. That's why forestry. And forestry is a big player here in our rohe in terms of our local industry and our employment. and our landowners, and first of all holding their land physically and then holding their land financially and in other ways, giving us means to develop. A little bit similar to the seas, although we were still fighting about that in the late 1980s. Last century still, but last 1980s, and just sort of getting that settled now. And whereas with the land, apart from some of our Tū Whare cousins who got a bit of a 100-year head start on us, most of us don't quite have the scale, or organisational scale yet to be able to make a big impact in terms of producers of forest, plantation managed forest, that is. So that's one of the things we have to do. And I was asked a question over lunch, are we ready, can we do that quickly in terms of meeting requirements for producing product that the customers want? And at the moment, not yet. That's going to take a bit of work. So to be able to trade with these goods, we need to be able to give the owners of the basic resource, in this case the land, we need to be able to give them the tools so that they can get their organisations functionally and structurally pointed in the right direction. And at the moment, they're trying to carve their way out of prehistoric caves with a blunt chisel and a wooden hammer. It's called a tore whenua. And government resistance. So with the seas, a little bit different, because we do have some scale, at least with the iwi-owned organisations. Still could, as the chair of two of them, still could get more scale if we, when the opportunities arise, we will. But we're big enough now to be on a world scale, and I'll come back to some of the lessons. Now, bees, we're doing really, really well. We have got some unique propositions, which we need to do more of, but again, we need more scale. And we need to be able to work together more, actually collaboratively. So we had this thing we used to have this thing most of you are too young. So I won't point at the people that I know who aren't too young to remember this, but in the 1960s, we used to have a government policy called assimilation. And it was described at the time as, this is how we describe assimilation. It was a shark saying to a kahawai, let's assimilate. So we got to get to the point where we are actually collaborating together, so people are working to get productively more than they would if they're working on their own, and it's not because Party A is giving more to Party B. We just got to use our strengths collectively. Whether it doesn't matter actually what it is. We've just picked trees, Bs and Cs because I happen to be directly involved in those three back here at home. But we do need to make sure that we are using those ngā mea hāngai ke tātou nei. Ngā mea o te kāinga. So what have we got that's really, really unique? And so what we've got to be able to do, notwithstanding that forestry is a big contributor and a big employer of people here in Aotearoa, and so is the seafood industry and around the country, and so is the manuka industry around the country, although we have an ambition, most of us, to be owning more of that value chain than we currently do. Is that, and the key here, as you've already heard this morning, is not, although part of it is making sure we have mana motuhake on what they call intellectual property. In other words, we have mana motuhake on our mana motuhake, is that we've got to get out of the commodity trap. And traders, I say trade negotiators, and traders will tell you that, oh, no, look, we'll just take your hockey block. No, those 10 kg cardboard boxes are fine, and we'll take those and put them into China because they're really, post-COVID, they really want those now. You shouldn't be developing your new 3-fillet product pack, which costs you 20% more to provide and costs the customers in Qingdao or Shanghai 40% more than they would be paying if they were buying it out of a box. So we got to make sure that sometimes you have to do that for cash flow and just move the product. But this is not a criticism of the people who have been working in these areas. But let's not waste the crisis. We've just been through 6 months of what have we got? We got reimagining, reassessing. I was writing these down this morning. Reassessing, reigniting. Basically changing how we look at things because we had to. So let's not waste that and use the momentum. So out of the commodity trap. And if Harrods doesn't want our manuka, then there's there's a vernacular way of saying that's fine with us. But then we'll find someone that will, on a regular basis, and pay the premium. And that's going to take some time, and it takes a bit of patience, and it also takes a bit of capital, intellectual and financial. And you heard this morning from people who are up for it. These people, the ones you heard from this morning, well, at least Ingrid and Manu, certifiably insane. If you know, who would do that out of choice? So, hey, but because you've got a different driver, we have got time. We need to take that time, and we can't afford to just sit down and sit around and wait. We've got to keep moving. But the trade, to be able to sell product in the right, we're only little. We are only little. And you know, there's nothing wrong with Ngāti Porou East Coast aspiring to be in the first division. We almost got there. So we can get that close. We could do it again. But it's not about it's not about being too small to have ambition. We can have the ambition. We just got to make sure that we are working in the right area and got the right tools. And by that I mean let's pick our market segments and let's concentrate on getting the wedge in there and working hard. Here's an example, then I'll finish. So we've been going to seafood fairs around the world, and I was thrown into seafood sort of stuff in 1990. And I was second drop too in that case because the first two pulled out, and Cabinet was looking around. Cabinet was looking around for someone else that could get in quickly. But more than three and a half decades been going offshore a couple of times a year to trade shows to do with seafood. And you always see products being displayed and new technology, and what you don't see until very recently is, and we saw this 2 years ago. Did Paul get here? No. Paul Morgan. No. We had, he told me he was, anyway. Don't believe what the traders say. So we had a stand up there in Qingdao, which is now the biggest seafood show probably in the globe. And it was Sea Lord, it was Kono, it was Portnick. Who else was there, Tina? Anyway, 5 of us. All Kiwi, more than 60% Maori owned, and especially when the Tū Whare Toa Haka group came past, we couldn't get through. There were so many people coming to see the stand, and it was one of the best shows that the people there had. Bit of collaboration, bit of cooperation, and everybody had a great show. Now, that's business as usual. Now we've got to kick on to the next stage. So that's what I mean by somebody had this brain fart that said, why don't we all be on the same stand? We cut our costs down per metre. We have less need for people on the stand. We can have more people actually doing the negotiations and trading. Chairman's happy, productivity goes up. And we service the customers better. And it was a nice looking stand. So a couple of examples, and then so that's it. There's one, and then there are some things happening in forestry, not so quickly, partly because takes 35 years for the trees to grow. But there is more happening in that area as well in terms of being able to collaborate and provide product into a form where there are locally owned producers to take it out of a straight log form into a value-added process. Now, I was going to talk about some numbers, but I don't think so. I think the most important thing here, from my point of view, from here, taking something you'd be surprised to know, taking a Ngāti Porou-centric view, is that, we've got to take a long-term view. We have to be ambitious. We don't bow down. We may have to wait till the right opportunity comes, but we don't. When it comes to the things that we're fighting for, because it is future generations, there's a lot at stake. So you just got to keep going. When it gets too tough, when you think it's tough and you start to feel sorry for yourself, just think about your nanny and what she'd say. Yeah. So then you get up again and go start again. Bueno.
Questions from the floor? Now's your chance.
That wasn't part of it.
Well, you got the man in many chairs up here.
Kia ora koutou, ko Lily Stender, taku ingoa Tologa Bay Innovation. Kia ora Whaimutu. One of the things you first said in the beginning was we mustn't put our taonga at risk, and everything we do is with that intergenerational lens, which I tautoko. Obviously the forestry is a huge part of our economic driver up the coast, and however it hasn't necessarily provided all the solutions for us in terms of providing employment and beneficial economic opportunity for us on the ground. So over the last few days, I don't know if you've noticed, Uwawa has been destroyed again by the slash, and God knows what it's actually doing to our kapitikai, our kaimoana. A few months' time we'll be walking around like that, We don't know what's happening in the waters. It's, Anyway, I'm hoping that you are working with the council and the forestry organisations to find a proper solution to this matter. May I ask, have you found a solution?
The answer is no. A solution or solutions to that particular condition. The ingredients of it, though, we believe we've identified some of the key elements. And so one of those is changing the forestry management practice. And so that, it's a little bit too much detail here, but just so we can make some sense here, where we are talking about trees either blown down, washed down, or cut down, and it's a residue of the forest that were cut and left behind. All three have ended up in the floods, have ended up in the rivers, and then they go down the rivers and they end up either at the bridge or on the beach here. In this case, we're talking about Uwawa, but it happens in other parts of other catchments as well. In 2018, it happened here as well as in Nelson and other places. So we need to change the forestry management practice so that whole hillsides aren't cut at the same time. This is an oversimplification, but it basically, if it could be done in a staged fashion, that would reduce the risk of that hillside sliding. Secondly, we need to, and that may mean two companies have to cooperate to move their gangs from one of the woodlots to another, because unfortunately we don't have many cases where it's the same forestry company who owns the logs on the whole catchment, right? So that takes, I talked about collaboration, that takes some working together, sharing costs, making sure that our workers don't just become the casualty. They don't just become, okay, you're working this week, you're not working next week because the next scan's coming in and with company 3, okay? We're going to change it for it. That's a harvest. That if that could be done immediately, then we might see some results in 5 years' time, when those, depending on the flood course. Secondly, there's how we plant and what we plant, which is, and you'll see, that's 10, 15 years before you see the results of that. And then there's the harvest practice and where we harvest and what we harvest. And so they will take some time, but I do believe, and these are also looking for the best available science on this too, that we need to make sure that we are finding enduring solutions, not just a quick fix. Okay, so that's, and I can say, for instance, one of the catchment, I'll come back on the slash, one of the forestry companies I work with was able to tell the AGM last year they had no slash, and they're harvesting in 3 of the catchments which are highly prone to erosion. And one of the reasons is that the owners of the land and the owners of those forests as well, their Korean JV partner, agreed that they would have 30, well, they ended up with 35% at least of the forest right area is either riparian offset or bush reserve. So they have got wider offsets before anything can get into the creek. That, however, means that the forest owner and the landowner are giving up, well, 20% of what would otherwise be harvested. And that's quite a big drop in income. They were prepared to take that because it was a conscious decision. So that's the sort of decision making that can have some impact. There's other things about that tauwharepārai catchment, but that's a bit of a detail. We have a question down here.
Kia ora, ko Javana Robia hau noko nei, no ngā pui hoki. My question to you is around the forestry as well. Correct me if I'm wrong. We have, 95% of our forestry going over to China, and we have 2% going over to Korea, and yet we can't build houses here in New Zealand. With the COVID happening and everything shutting down, and everybody's talking about resilience and how we can help our own, I would say about 80% of our forestry workers don't own their own home. That sort of thing is happening. We've got forestry workers that are still homeless in Te Tairawhiti. We've got that happening, and it's real. My question to you is, even around the seabeds, all it has to take is a algae bloom, and our sea is gone again. But what are we going to do after all our trees are gone in the next 5-10 years? What are our people? What's the sustainability that we have to actually give them foundations, and their biggest foundation is a home, for not only themselves but for their whānau and their mokopuna. So, I just put it back to our companies, our organisations, our big companies here in Te Tairawhiti and through New Zealand, that these are the big issues on the ground floor, is a home for our people, is the homes that, all these, we send trades, stuff overseas to all these traders, and we're making the money for who? For what? I'll just say for myself, my tupuna was one of the first Pākehā traders here in Aotearoa, no Ngāpui. He traded for my nan for a musket and a blanket. So, but we still have this issue today in the ground floor. So, all this trading and everything that we have here, it's, hey, kei te pai tērā kaupapa i tēnei ata, i tēnei rā. Engari, he mamai taku ngākau, taku hiningaro, mō taku whānau, mō taku iwi hoki.
Kia ora. Kia ora, ka rongo te mamai. Ko te tikanga ia o te mahi i tīmatara e aku tīpon, me tatai noa ki aku mātua, ana ka hoki mai au, ki ahau. O tēnei te mahi ngahere, koena kia whaihua mō Ngāti whakatipu. So that was the driver that my grandparents, then my parents, and then I got given it. So some of us get shoulder tapped for these jobs. Mine was an ankle tap. Fell flat on my face. I had no choice either, was forestry. But that was a job, a task that I got. And the purpose of it is to be able to grow our ability to be able to fend for ourselves. Exactly that. And on the homelessness, etc., if there are people who are currently employed in forestry who are homeless, very happy for you to give me where they are and who they are, because I have a small company that I work with, that I chair. We have 75 employees through the contracting gangs. They are all housed and they're all paid. So, there's something there. Well, I'm not saying there's anything wrong, but that's why we're doing it, so we can fix it. I think you said, I think I can correct it, we do not send 95% of our logs to China. They take 30% of the exported product, that's for sure. They have been a big customer up to now. And we export probably 65% of our output, of our log output gets exported. And China takes a third of that, roughly, which is still a big chunk because they're way ahead of the next biggest buyer of our produce. And then some of the product, so the 30 to 40%, which is consumed here, can be exported. Some of that is exported, but certainly a lot of it goes offshore in the log form, and a lot of that goes to China. I'm not saying that. And why can't we build houses here? Is a deeper question, which is probably above my pay grade. But I agree with you about being able to do more for people that are unable to not have that resilience. We've got to work on that.
Kia ora whai. Look, we're going to call it a stop there because we're running a bit behind time. So, ho mai te pake pake? Well, Chris, that ends this particular session. I just want to make one point and one observation as a facilitator for this session. I mean, one of the clear messages that have coming through from Meng, from the Hokainga as well, it just reminds me on Sunday, if I may reflect just very briefly on Whai's other half of his whakapapa. Te Arawa released a Vision 2050 on Sunday. The very clear message from that, going right back to the time of Pari and the homelands, bringing it forward to now, was this clear message: never forget who you are, never forget where you're from, and take the treasures of your ancestors with you. And with that, you can actually face any challenge. That it makes you resilient, and you can cast and create your own future. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Akatara, kia ora tātou. Can I just prelude to, before handing over to Robert to facilitate the next session. So this morning we started with the Minister, Nanaia Mahuta, representing a government's view about trade and Māori interests. We then heard from Laura talking about what's her thoughts are for the pending UK negotiations with New Zealand and some of the things that she hopes might be able to come out of that. We then zoomed off around the world into Asia, and we heard from Simon and our own Meng talking about China. So this next session, this really it gets to the heart of what today is really all about. So won't steal Robert's thunder in introducing Vangelis, but I will say that this gentleman that you're about to hear from now